Hello Internet! Welcome to another episode of Tweak Plays. I'm Tweak, and today I will be reviewing Dragon Age 2. Don't worry, I will be reviewing Dragon Age Origins. I just played Dragon Age 2, however, so it's fresh in my mind, and while I was playing I figured I'd gather some footage. Note, however, that this footage is modded, so listed at the bottom in the credits there will be links to the mods that I used if you want your Hawke and your gameplay to kind of work and look the way that mine did. In Dragon Age 2, you play Hawke, one member of a family fleeing Lothering's blight in Ferelden. Hawke, of unknown class, gender, or appearance, because you can customize all of that, then has to take care of his or her family in Kirkwall, starting with obtaining access to the city, and then from there gaining wealth and a lost title, and essentially climbing the hierarchy of the city. The history of Kirkwall is a city built on slaves, slavery, and other heinous things. So visually speaking, the graphics and the models really reflect that. I got that feeling of oppression and darkness and despair, really, in a lot of the areas. They were dark and dusty, and whenever you kill stuff there's persistent gore and blood, and it really did feel kind of like one of those dark fantasy RPGs that BioWare is so proud of. So visually speaking, that did a lot for the game. However, because they chose to go with a realism route, the gamble with realism is always that as soon as more realistic graphics are on the market, whatever game that you made using realism as your theme looks dated. So while now the game looks old and kind of frumpy and a little polygony, then when it first came out, it was very visually striking, and it looked very good as far as what was available at the time. Granted, this was only a few years ago, but still, that passage of time has made the game look kind of dated with release of titles that have much stronger realistic appeal. There are a lot of quirks that the game has to keep it kind of interesting and going. One of which is that what your Hawke looks like is reflected in what your family looks like. Meaning, if you were to build a very white porcelain skin, dark-haired goddess, essentially, of a Hawke, then that would be reflected, the skin tone, the features would be reflected, as well as the eye color in your family, your sibling and your mom. However, if you were to build some big Amazonian-looking, dark-skinned, awesome, beefy Hawke, that would also be reflected in your family. Aside from The Sims, I don't think there are any games that take into account genetics, so that was pretty cool. There are also other dialogue options. In most RPGs, you have your good option and your bad option, which gets the point across, but it doesn't leave a lot to neutrality or other tones. In Dragon Age 2, there is a humor option, which allows you to basically be the sarcastic butthead. And I loved using that option. I always had a humorous tone in my answers unless I wasn't allowed the option. So that definitely led to some very funny conversation. And another thing that's pretty cool is whatever disposition you have, meaning which answer you use most, whether it's good, bad, or humorous, is reflected then in idle dialogue and conversation where you don't get to pick your answer. So if you generally pick humorous responses, you will in idle dialogue be kind of a clown and say funny and sarcastic things. That same thing is reflected if you usually pick the aggressive approach or the helpful approach. You will always kind of reflect that in how you deal with other things that you, the player, cannot control. So that is another quirk that I thought was pretty interesting. I also enjoyed the decision tree available in Dragon Age 2. It's very deep. I liked how every single thing I did and said actually had a purpose and a meaning that was reflected later. I also liked how, because of the story of the game that I don't want to reveal anything of, no spoilers here, you are allowed to stay neutral through 99% of the game. So you don't necessarily have to pick good, bad, or your decisions don't necessarily have to reflect one side or the other. I also enjoyed the character depth within the game. Because you have so many companions and you meet so many other characters, it's nice for them to be believable. And in fact, later on in the game, after the pace picks up a little bit, I felt like a lot of the quests were actually almost heart-wrenching because I felt so attached to the other characters within the game. Whether they were companions or just NPCs, I would actually have to pause sometimes and shout at my computer screen because I was so upset about the course that the the quest took, which means that was good writing and very good character development, so I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed how even during the romance lines that are available to you as you play with your companions, the romance line reflects how the character would actually probably respond in a situation like that. So instead of everybody getting lovey-dovey gooey when they're romanced, they behave in such a way that you would expect them to behave, that is believable. The game mechanics are very easy to get into and to understand. You only really use a couple of keys, and I imagine that that was optimized for the console players. That simple gameplay can be balanced if you are one of those advanced players to have more in it that requires tactics, and that gives you the tactical advantage if you want to play on a higher difficulty level, or if you want to make the game more difficult by only having one or two people in your party, meaning you and one other companion. That raises the difficulty level. Another quirk is that at Dragon Age 2 you are allowed to import your Dragon Age Origins save if it's available on your PC or whatever console you ended up playing Dragon Age Origins on. That was fun because your events that took place in Dragon Age Origins are then reflected sometimes back in through idle dialogue and codexes. Because the game takes place over many years, although all in the same place, the environments and the character models actually change slightly to reflect the passage of time. That was very, very neat and a nice little addition to Dragon Age 2. The one thing that I absolutely have to comment on, because it drove me bonkers and it drove the entire Dragon Age 2 community bonkers, is the heavy reuse of environments. It just got way too tiring. I understand that the entire game takes place in Kirkwall and the surrounding area, but having to go to the same maps over and over and over again just became cumbersome and tiresome. I got tired of traveling, namely to the Wounded Coast, because it's such a big map, and then, you know, invariably, once you pick up a quest that takes you to the Wounded Coast, that quest is going to have you travel to the other end of the map. And then, once you travel to the other end of that huge map, in order to get out of the Wounded Coast, you have to travel all the way back to the beginning where you came in. I don't mind when Bethesda has giant maps. That's their whole point, and that's pretty cool of them. However, they allow you to map travel and fast travel, regardless of where you are, as long as no one is trying to kill you immediately. Because Dragon Age 2, you don't have that option. You can't fast travel unless you're back essentially at the starting point. It just became too much. It was very tiresome. It was very, very annoying to have to go from one end of the map to the other end of the map every single time. Area reuse was redone as well, meaning areas for certain side quests and even a few of the main quests, such as dungeons or caves, they were basically carbon copies of the exact same area, just reused over and over and over again. And that reuse, while they did block off certain areas of the map, even the map was the same. So that became so tiresome because as a player, I felt like going through my side quests, I was going through the same area and redoing the same thing over and over and over again when I felt like I had just completed this area. Why am I here again, completing this area again when I just cleared it out? So that was annoying as well. The story, because of the way that it is set up, it evolves around Hawke and Hawke's life and the companions' lives. It felt like it lacked a sense of urgency and need. There was the Blight happening in Ferelden. That whole thing was actually very, very interesting, and I'll go back over that in my review of Dragon Age Origins. But in Dragon Age 2, it felt like I was standing there watching all of these things happen around me, and I wasn't really privy or important to any of them. I really didn't feel like there was some kind of ultimate purpose I was trying to achieve. There wasn't some big goal that I was reaching for. It was just, hey, I'm this guy. I happen to be in this area. People will pay me to do stuff. Hooray! It felt like more like I was an NPC and less like I was a main character. There are also some plot holes if you happen to play through the game as a mage, because Kirkwall and the inhabitants therein are very magist. They're very against mages. They hate mages in a lot of cases. They either hate them or they love them, because that's the whole point of the game. If you play through as a mage, which I love because I love being a caster, it felt like there were a whole bunch of plot holes because the entire town knew I was a mage. I kept doing stuff for them, and yet I never got arrested. I never had Templars tracking me or trying to catch me, so it was very bizarre. I'm sure that there are rational reasons that the writers can give me to make it so it's not actually a plot hole, but unless you really, really, really think about it and try to justify it, it seems like a plot hole. I also had some technical problems with Dragon Age 2, wherein the game would just crash. It happened fairly frequently. It could happen between 5 minutes and 2 hours where it would just crash. And throughout the game, I also had 2 fatal errors that caused my machine to just completely reboot. The screen went black, my compy went ah, and then it rebooted. My computer is extremely stable, so the fact that it felt like it needed to reboot means that there's a serious error. I will qualify this by saying that initially when I played this game, when it was first released, there weren't really any errors or crashes that I had to worry about, so this had to be either part of a patch or part of a Windows update. Either way, that seriously needs to be fixed. In passing, I feel like I have to mention, especially because my footage is modded, that there is a huge modding community for this game. It helps bring the game up a notch if you mod it, and I don't know if you can if you have the console version, but for PC specifically, Dragon Age 2 Nexus is a great place to get mods, and there are a lot of mods. Dragon Age 2 actually wasn't that terrible of a game. So because of that, and because of the modding community, which really does bring it up a little bit, I will give it a 3 out of 5. It had a lot of shortcomings, it really did. But I feel like now that Inquisition has been leaked and there's a trailer now for us to see, chances are Dragon Age 2 was simply just laying the framework for Inquisition. If that's the case, and Inquisition just builds off of what was laid out in Dragon Age 2 and becomes one of those epic games that we all remember, like Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter Nights or Mass Effect, and I will forgive all of the shortcomings of Dragon Age 2 because it did feel kind of rushed, and it did come out fairly soon after Dragon Age Origins came out. Hopefully, Inquisition does rise to the challenge and becomes one of those great games. I can only hope that BioWare knows what it's doing. This has been another episode of Tweak Playz. I hope you enjoyed it. Like it, comment, share it with your friends, and come back for more episodes.